Well, thank you so much for your patience, Jen, because that was a bit of a fiasco last time. It was like a whole system failure.
Getting very complicated.
Last time I was just about to offer reading my story to you. I mentioned before we press record that I had never read it out loud until an hour ago when I thought maybe I should do a run through. And it surprised me how different, I mean, it shouldn't surprise me because I know it intellectually, but it's constantly surprising that how different an act it is. And I have to say, I actually got emotional. So it's like still touching a nerve. And we'll see in take two if that happens again. But it was surprising. It's interesting because reading it, even if you wrote it, it's still there you still are emotionally engaged, but reading it out loud really reinforces it.
And I think you start to notice things as a reader or as an actor that you might not notice as the writer.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah.
Well, that's kind of lovely when it's not terrifying, right?
Right. I don't know yet. Maybe it is going to be terrifying. But probably not.
Probably
really,
not.
I'm a firm believer that most audiences, and it doesn't matter if you're doing it for fun or professionally or anything else in between, an audience is an audience. I think most are supportive.
Yes. Yeah.
Because I think everybody recognizes that you're doing something that many people would rather not, which is using your voice, which is the theme that we were talking about before. And that's the joy of creativity, is really putting yourself out there.
Yes.
Which is frightening, but also life reaffirming.
Yeah. And I think too, in terms of story, people are looking for things that resonate with them. And the richer your work is, and I know it is very rich, right? The richer it is, the more people are going to see their own experiences reflected. It's really, yeah, and I think people are really hungry for stories now, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's an interesting thing that storytelling, or personal narrative, has just kind of blossomed in these days. And I think COVID is partly responsible for it. But I think when you think about the Flame and the Story Slam, there is a hunger for those stories that predates COVID. And I don't know if it has to do with the fact that we spend so much time with technology nowadays that a sharing of stories has become hugely important.
Mm-hmm. Okay. I shall launch into it.
Okay.
And clear my throat. I have a tendency to lose my voice. And I've taken a course on that.
And how's that for a metaphor?
Yes, I know, eh? It's like, seriously? Okay, it's called the Mesquita of Cordoba. To sit down on the cool marble floor and gaze above, mesmerized and dwarfed by the seemingly endless forest of wine and sand-colored double arches rising to the heavens, a labyrinth of naves and mystery, of a golden age remembering its glory, besieged by the pettiness of power and religion, to lose time and self, but not essence. Wafts of orange and jasmine from the courtyard, sandalwood and incense then and now too with hints of sweat, sunscreen, and cheap cologne. Mournful calls to prayer and the metronome of the Apostles' Creed, then. Now, Spanish sermons and the tourist chatter of global voices. Stop 2 of the bus trip that wound its way through the Moorish capitals of Andalusia. Not a deluxe bus, but neither was it a dusty one smelling of diesel with the roof hatch open for air conditioning. Scrambling up stretches of golden steep hills and down arid valleys, punctuated with the green of olive groves or vineyards, this bus was the compromise cooked up by my family, who, when I said I wanted to see what most tourists to Spain come for, and on my own at age 18 said, no, or yes, it's a good idea to see Seville, Cordoba, and Granada, but only on a tour to be safe. So here I was, a young adult, an old teen, in a busload of American and a smattering of German couples, with a few mothers and daughters thrown in, but largely older married couples. Well, at that age, every couple seems old, but there was one exception, a young couple from Bahrain that looked as out of place as I felt, alone in a group. I sat up front with the driver who did the color commentary, radiating knowledge and wisdom with equal amounts of wry and jaded humor, to the jocular play-by-play of the young tour guide, an actor herding tourists on the side. Finally, I got what I wanted, sort of, not chained to family, dragged on pilgrimages to ancient relative, dressed in black in dim-lit apartments, shuttered up, carpets rolled up to ward off heat, and put on display by my grandmother. Family worn out by history, wary of today, gazing at me with curiosity and bafflement, this descendant from Canada, or better, the New World. I could have been an alien from another planet. Remember your heritage, my grandmother would scold whenever I made a grammatical mistake or pronunciation error in Spanish, my heritage. But what have I seen of it? Hours spent on hotel lunches, dinners, and activities throughout the day. Obviously, I couldn't hang out with a driver and tour guide all day. I had to make a connection with some other fellow passengers. I was intrigued by the exotic young couple. The wife had intricate henna patterns etched on her hands, arms, and feet. I had to ask what they were doing on this trip through Andalusia. We're on our honeymoon. I was incredulous. Why on earth would you spend your honeymoon on the tour bus with strangers, spending hours on the road with hardly any privacy? We're here on pilgrimage to our heritage, to pay respect to all the jewels in our culture. I was dumbfounded and wide-eyed and learning a harsh truth. Imagine that the best your culture has to offer, its zenith of majesty and beauty, is in another country. I couldn't resist asking how this felt, but the couple just looked at me and shrugged in painful resignation. A passport required to see your culture. It's yours, but it isn't. My bones and heart understood. It calls to you. It can never be yours, but your soul is partly there already, rooted in history. I don't remember the details of what I saw in the Mesquita, the sweep of gold, blue, and red mosaics with detailed floral patterns, juxtaposed with the cherubs, angels, and crucifixes of the cathedral. But I remember feeling in awe of its tremendous size and beauty. Really a Russian doll with a Catholic cathedral at its core, a mashup of religion, architecture, culture, and man's ego, or man's dreams. I can't remember exactly how the honeymooners felt inside the biggest mosque in the world, one where they couldn't practice their faith, and how they reconciled the ambitions of Al-Andalus with the reality of Andalusia. I remember feeling dwarfed by the forest of arches, but not small. I remember promising myself to return one day, to feel again the stillness of time, getting emotional, to feel again the stillness of time against the rush of the outside, the cold comfort of the marble against the unrelenting sun outside, to feel hope and promise, to feel home. I still melt down there.
Well, and I mean, and I can guess why. It's hugely it's a really important moment, you know, and for me that's the crux of it, right? And you think about, for example, generational trauma, right? And how our forebears who came to Canada. I mean, now we know that there's a whole other side of the story, right? With Indigenous people, but there's also the story of our own ancestors who were wrenched from their countries, and the longing that they must have felt for their countries. And you know, and I think, you know, when you know about the 7 generations of trauma and how a trauma will stay with a family apparently for 7 generations, you know, so I think it seems logical to me. I mean, not happy, but it seems kind of normal to me, in the, you know, c'est normal kind of sense of it, that you might feel some of your mom's longing, and maybe your family's longing for your mother, and yeah. I don't want to get too far away from your own story, but I had just an interaction with somebody on one of Sharon Blackie's, this is a couple of years ago. Sharon Blackie's, I believe she's Irish, but she's written a couple of books.
And she's into mythology, right?
Yeah.
Into, Celtic mythology.
Yes, yeah. And how it resonates with everyday life, and how it shows parts of ourselves. Anyway, on one of her posts, I responded to some comment with a share about how I really longed to go back to the city that my grandmother had come from in Scotland. And she made some comment about, and the land longs for you too. Honestly, I had a similar reaction as to your memory of yourself, of your, you know, your younger self, and that ghost is calling you.
Yeah.
Just that longing, you know, and there is a word for it. I can't remember what it is. A longing, but you have been there, right? For me, I have not been to my grandma's.
Yeah, I've been there like once.
Yeah.
In this trip, right? And it's fascinating because when in the original exercise, and I did have that wallpaper for years on my computer, right? But and so of course the double arches, you don't forget, but all the other intricacies of the mosaics and everything, that was sort of a wash, because I mean, it's fabulous, and one of the reasons why I want to go there again. But the double arches are almost enough, right? But I remember I once was on a train with my daughter, and we had wanted to stop at Cordoba, but in the rush of time, we couldn't. We had to go straight to Malaga, where we have family. But the train stopped in Cordoba. And I was like, oh. I almost made it back. Almost. And then, of course, that was our intention in March of 2020, and COVID took care of that. So one day. But I think also there are just so many themes like that have emotional hooks into me, like the whole the pros and cons of heritage, you know, and I felt talk about editorializing. I mean, this was mostly written with my 18-year-old voice. And when I talked about my relatives dressed in black, and I would have to, my grandmother would drag every time I went to Spain. And for a while I went, there was a stretch of time where I went almost every summer for a couple of years. I thought, I'm the only grandchild that she takes on all these pilgrimages. Mostly, I think, because I was the only one who, my grandmother was a very stern lady, and I just didn't have what it took to say no to her. But I also thought when I wrote this that it sounded bad, and I felt I should explain that I did care for these relatives, but they were dressed in black, and they were defeated by history, and they did see me like an alien from another planet. So all of that is true. And they were defeated by history, but you know, they fought the noble fight and lost, and that they could never get away from that, right? So
can you tell me more about that?
I'm going to tell the story, but it's not as if it was something that was shared often. I heard it a couple of times, and never in detail, certainly not from my mother. My grandmother, one of those occasions, this always seems to happen when relatives blurt out answers to questions you've had for eons that they've never answered, and all of a sudden you're doing something completely alien, and they blurt it all out, and you have no pen and paper or a recording device, and you're thinking, oh my God, she's actually telling me the story that I've always wanted to hear, and will I remember it, right? But anyways, long story short, because it's a very long tale, my mother and aunt were young teens when they left with my grandparents and my great grandmother in the end days of the Spanish Civil War. So they lasted all that time. My grandfather was a medic. And then they realized when they were in Barcelona that the gig was up, that they were losing. And so they managed to escape to France. And really, my grandfather was an exceedingly lucky man, and had met with at a neurological conference before the outbreak of the Civil War with Dr. Penfield of McGill University, who said, if you ever need a job, we'd be happy to have you. And literally contacted him, and they were able to come to Canada at the time when Canada was not accepting immigrants. They came in with a special cabinet approval as refugees. And I only found this out really recently. That's another long story, but that was not shared by my family. I found that out through a request for information from the Canadian government. Anyways, they were the lucky ones. we had other relatives who made it into France, and France had their camps they had their refugee camps, and they were returned. And so they lived in fear all their lives during Franco, because there were more people killed post the Spanish Civil War than during the Spanish Civil War, out of retribution and whatnot. And some of them were jailed, and some of them just sort of went into underground. And so that's why they were defeated by history.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
no, that's a very significant story.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, very significant part of the picture.
Yeah.
And again, like, imagine coming from Andalusia, which is, I think, always warm, always hot. I mean, I've been there in the wintertime, and it was, warm, and ending up in Montreal. And coming from, Spanish culture, which of course is a huge stereotype, but, we see, what we know, and what I certainly experienced there was, it's, just the kind of Latin heart, right?
Yeah.
And the tendency to be outgoing, and the tendency to, just kind of be more sociable and so on. And I guess in terms of culture, maybe Montreal was probably not so much of a culture shock, because that's, again, a kind of a Latin way of Canada has a Latin province. It's Quebec.
Yeah.
But depending on if he was sort of like on the English side of things or the French side of things,
Yeah.
huge culture shock.
Yeah. Oh no, it was terrible. It was really hard on them. And
Yeah.
also because when they emigrated or came in as refugees, they were viewed by, especially in Quebec, Quebec at the time was pretty close to a fascist society itself under Duplessis, right?
Right.
And so they were looked at as communists by many. So, they were very lucky, because they obviously found a home in the academic world, the psychiatric world in Montreal. And but yeah, I mean, an immigrant story is different from a refugee story.
But I'm just looking at this sentence. I remember feeling dwarfed by the forest of arches, but not small.
Yeah,
That's incredible.
Yeah, and I think that's for me what it is. It's like such a vast structure, but not intimidating. Right? It still holds you.
Yeah, that's
Yeah.
amazing. And so the story of the couple becomes your story in a way, right? Like,
Yeah.
you're so skillful with that, Mary, honestly. And the way you've taken us on the trip with you, with all the senses, everything's there. We can absolutely see it. We can absolutely smell it. Like, we are absolutely there with you. It's pretty incredible.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah. You don't have to give me an answer to this suggestion right now, honestly, because it's really putting you on the spot. But I would say that this story could easily be a story that you tell. Yeah.
Well, you're going to have to teach me how to do that. How do you construct a story to tell? That's your passion. And that's what you've done so successfully on stage. So maybe that's a lesson you can give us all.
Yeah, I'd be happy to. Like, I'd love to hear this story. Yeah. I can hook you up. Yeah, congratulations. This is wonderful.
Thank you for inviting me to do it.
Oh, it's entirely my pleasure, Mary. Honestly, it's really, really wonderful. Really wonderful to spend this time with you, and then to see this amazing work. Like, wow.
Oh, thank you. I still have to put my name on it. I haven't done that yet, even though I pledged to do it last time. It still has the same file name, and it still does not carry my name.
Well, it's out into the universe now, so.
That's it. That's right. It's everybody's now. It's in public domain.
Well, but people will be able to find some resonance in that story, you know, so many aspects of it.
I hope so. I hope so. Yeah.
Beautiful.
Well, thank you. And I think we have to do a follow-up on how to write a story to tell.
With pleasure.
Yeah.
Okay.
Thanks so much.
Okay, Mary. Thank you.
Bye.
It's really, really great chatting.
Oh, it's so much fun. You know, whenever.